See, now that's good material. See, when you talk, guys, when you talk off air and you start getting into the good stuff, you got to save that gold for on air. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Exposure. Marcus D here with Dan O'Donnell, everybody. Dan O'Donnell. Hi, Dan. How are you, bud?
Thank you.
How are you, man? How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Glad to be here, Marcus.
So I got your name from Janelle Branchin, Wisconsin 22. She said that you were on the forefront, and I started thinking, yeah, I mean, okay, Wisconsin seems to be real quiet on the media side of things. Obviously, Maricopa's all over the place. Antrim County, Michigan is all over the place. New Hampshire is big right now. But your name popped up, and I thought, oh, well, if he's covering it, we'll see how much he is. I dove into your stuff, man. Holy smokes. We could talk for 3 hours if we had a chance.
Yeah. I mean, there is quite a bit that's going on in Wisconsin, I can tell you that.
So I just want to do a quick synopsis, who you are, how you got here, and then we'll get right into it.
I'm a talk show host on WISN radio in Milwaukee, which is the big talk station in the state. And also my show is syndicated on our partner station, 1310 WIBA in Madison. So I started, about 7-8 years ago, doing a talk show here. And after the 2020 election, just started getting reports and started looking into all of the irregularities because really, you might recall in the spring, Wisconsin held its presidential primary on April 7th, right after the COVID-19 lockdowns. Yeah. And people were freaking out that we had an in-person election. Well, I was looking into the way in which the COVID-19 lockdowns were being used to try to get as many mail-in ballots as possible, and the way that rules were being changed just sort of on the fly. And what it seemed to me was that there was a distinct attempt to give a partisan advantage to Joe Biden and to give a partisan advantage to the liberal Supreme Court candidate. We elect Supreme Court justices here in Wisconsin. That was on the ballot. Well, all of that sort of coalesced in, it almost seemed as though April was a dry run for the November presidential election, in which we had just a mountain of irregularities. And what's so unique about Wisconsin is that at the heart of it all is our elections commission, the Wisconsin Elections Commission, that's supposed to be in charge of running elections in Wisconsin. I mean, these weren't rogue operators. These were the people who were in charge of running the elections in the state of Wisconsin and the 5 biggest Democrat strongholds in the state.
Yeah. And I think that right there, that point, I want to hit on that first, because we have that here in Minnesota as well, because the outskirts of the Minneapolis-St. Paul circle is sparse with population, but within that circle, it's heavily populated with obviously Democratic leaning people. And so what happens is you only need maybe a handful of counties outside of that metro area in order to garner the 10 electoral college votes from the state of Minnesota. We were the only state to not vote Reagan. Now, granted, we had the Democratic candidate back when Reagan was running on his second term, but that's all you need is this little stronghold. You just need the stronghold in the metro area and then a couple scattered counties. And that's, I think that's what's happening in Wisconsin, because you've got Kenosha, Racine, Milwaukee, Madison, and Green Bay. And if you get those in a swing state, I think the population in those 5 counties is too strong to overpower, or to have the other counties overpower them. Am I wrong in that?
No, absolutely not. In fact, Wisconsin really only has 6-7 cities that are, what we would consider good-sized cities. And the 5 of those are the most heavily Democratic cities in the entire state. Now, remember, in November, Wisconsin was only won by Joe Biden by about 22,000 votes, somewhere in there. So a tiny little shift in what became known as the Wisconsin 5, Milwaukee, Madison, Green Bay, Racine, and Kenosha, can tip the entire election. And I believe that's what was going on, as these activist groups were basically partnering with the cities themselves to get exclusive access to the early voting numbers and to essentially take over the running of the election in those 5 cities.
Activist groups, who are they?
The Center for Tech and Civic Life. For your viewers who are unfamiliar with that group, Whenever I say Center for Tech or Civic Life or CTCL, think Mark Zuckerberg. The Facebook founder pumped $300 to $400 million into the 2020 election. But what was weird is he didn't do it in any sort of advocacy. He didn't support any candidates, not Joe Biden, not any other Democrat. He put the money directly into the operation of elections. Well, what my reporting and investigations by state legislative Republicans here in Wisconsin have found was that when CTCL, when Zuckerberg would present a grant with a city, right? And the big cities that he wanted to present grants to were the 5 biggest Democratic strongholds in Wisconsin: Milwaukee, Madison, Green Bay, Racine, and Kenosha, the Wisconsin 5. Those grants came with strings attached. And what those strings were was you had to essentially turn over your election operations, the way in which the election was run, to groups that CTCL was comfortable with. It was, in fact, in the contract. Milwaukee got $2.1 million, but it could not spend a single cent of that without CTCL approving. And there were only a certain number of groups that were allowed to partner with Milwaukee. And the big one was the National Vote at Home Institute. This was the group that was basically running wild in Wisconsin. And as far as my investigations go, essentially took over operations of the election in both Green Bay and Madison. Now, think about that for a second, Marcus. You got 2 of the 3 biggest cities in Wisconsin. I'm willing to wager, we just haven't gotten emails back of the open records requests from Madison. I'm willing to wager all 5 of these cities essentially turned over the way they were running their election. They turned over the administration of the election to a Facebook Mark Zuckerberg aligned group that was paying them in order, basically bribing them in order to take over the elections. Now, this is just one state. This is just one medium-sized state. I can only imagine how many other states this was going on in.
The only question, I mean, there's many questions, but I think the top of mind question, and I asked this of Eric Cardall of the Thomas More Society, who's been doing the on-the-ground litigation work through the Amistad Project there in Wisconsin. And I don't know if I got as clear of an answer as I wanted. So I'm going to ask you, how was that legal? How in the world are people able to pump millions of privately funded grants into a state's election system with strings attached and not have that be lobbying, or at the very least lobbying?
Well, it's a direct violation of Wisconsin law. In Wisconsin, the municipal clerk, it's actually codified in 2 different places. The municipal clerk runs the election. All right. So what was going on in Green Bay, and this is really fascinating.
Yeah, listen to this.
The emails show that the municipal clerk in Green Bay, a woman named Chris Teskey, was from almost the moment that the Facebook groups, the National Vote at Home Institute, there's a man named Michael Spitzer Rubenstein, who is basically spearheading the National Vote at Home Institute's operations in Wisconsin. As soon as he started getting involved, Teskey was emailing saying, I don't feel comfortable with this. What's going on? They're taking control of the election. I don't have any control. I'm not being listened to. Michael Spitzer Rubenstein is running things. I'm not. Eventually, after Spitzer Rubenstein, when the decision was made to hold central count, which I'm sure your viewers are familiar with, where they take the ballots from all over the city, and they would take them to one central location, which I have never gotten a clear answer why that's more efficient, but apparently it is. I mean, I can imagine why you want one centralized location for counting ballots, but I'm not going to speculate.
Right.
So once central count was finalized at the KI Center in Green Bay, the contract for the use of the KI Center's ballroom for central count was made out in the name of Michael Spitzer Rubenstein. He was the one who had control of the keys that were given to the secure rooms where they were actually holding the ballots. So think about this. A guy who has no tie to the city of Green Bay, really no ties to Wisconsin, imported from New York, is the only one with the keys who has access to the secure room where the ballots are stored. This is another major violation of Wisconsin law because there was no proper chain of custody for the ballots when they were dropped off by the voters to the moment that they were counted, right? So Teskey's getting so frustrated with all of this that her authority to run this election has been usurped She actually essentially quits. She takes FMLA time right before the election, which is unheard of for a clerk. And eventually, a few months after the election, she quit.
She's gone. Yeah.
So she quit, and she has not talked. The Brown County clerk, meanwhile, the Green Bay is in the county of Brown.
Sandy Juneau, right?
Sandy Juneau actually was writing emails to the Wisconsin Elections Commission saying, it looks like Green Bay has gone rogue here. We're not sure what they're doing. What's going on? Please advise. I'm not sure what's going on. The Wisconsin Election Commission was saying, oh, yeah, this is fine. This is fine. This is fine. We now have an email. Do you know how Michael Spitzer Rubenstein got hooked up with the people in Green Bay?
I know. Let me take my best guess because I'm pretty sure it was through the CTCL. It was through the National Vote at Home Association. Yes. I know he has ties back in New York to Bill de Blasio, but specifically how he was into Green Bay, I don't actually know. I don't know.
Specifically into Green Bay. How all of this illegality got from Milwaukee to Green Bay was the Wisconsin Elections Commission. There is an email from the administrator of the Wisconsin Elections Commission saying, hey, here's this guy, Michael Spitzer Rubenstein, you clerks in Madison and Green Bay and Racine and Kenosha. Milwaukee has been using him. You guys should really lean on his expertise as well. So you actually had the Wisconsin Elections Commission not only know that there was potentially illegal coordination going on between private groups who have, under Wisconsin law, no business being anywhere near the election and the people who are in charge of the elections, the Wisconsin Elections Commission is encouraging this. It was just mind-boggling to see this email. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I'm like, wait a second. That was the Wisconsin Elections Commission. That was Megan Wolf, the administrator. She knew about this, which she, in a hearing, by the way, a couple months ago, she said she had no idea who Michael Spitzer Rubenstein was. An email shows that she's lying. Now, why is she lying about that? Why is she lying about not knowing who this guy is? It's because she knows that all of this is violating state law. All of this means that Wisconsin's election was not conducted per the statute. Like, now, I'm not saying that, you know, there's this smoking gun proof that there were fraudulent ballots or anything like that. But when you hear what Spitzer Rubenstein and this Vote at Home Institute had access to and what they wanted to have access to, I mean, the only real conclusion you can draw, Marcus, is that there was a massive ballot harvesting operation that was aided by the people who are supposed to be running an unbiased election.
Okay, Wisconsin, anybody from Wisconsin, please listen up. If you are hearing the words of the guy you probably listen to every day, hopefully, on 1130 WISN, there is action that needs to be taken on your part. Okay? I can't stress enough. Obviously, Wisconsin has not been making the headlines because there's no sexy audit like there is in Maricopa, and there's nothing going on right now. But this is a percolating fire. It's like embers that have covered an overnight fire, but underneath it's so hot that if you just open it up and put a piece of paper on there, it would light up right away. Why? There's so many questions, but why in the world? If this was we don't need fraudulent ballots. We don't need Dominion machines. We don't need all that junk. If this goes against Wisconsin state law, why hasn't somebody done anything about this?
Because we just found out about all of this. We got the open records request filled in Green Bay, I want to say early March, late.
We've known about Spitzer Rubenstein for months now. We've known there was emails leaked, Dan, of him getting sensitive information, the sensitive machines, getting access with an internet code to the sensitive machines. That was a leaked email months ago. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about with Green Bay. With Milwaukee, we just found out the emails just came in literally last week. Okay. Maybe 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I saw you break that. I think it was on May 6th on Thursday's show. You broke that news.
Thursday that I got Eric Cardall, I think, had the same information. And the state legislature has been working with this stuff as well. And I think they just came in. So, yeah, we knew about Spitzer Rubenstein. What we didn't know was what he was trying to do in Milwaukee. You ready for this?
Please.
Not only did Claire Woodall-Vaugh, who is the director of the Milwaukee Election Commission, instead of a clerk in Milwaukee, there's an entire commission, right, that runs elections. She's in charge of the commission. She operates as the municipal clerk. Okay, she's in charge of elections. She is giving Spitzer Rubenstein at the end of every day of early voting in Wisconsin an email that tells him exactly by ward how many ballots are outstanding, how many have been returned, where some of the ballots are that are still out in the wild that haven't yet been returned. Now, why would he want this data? The obvious answer is so he would know exactly where he needs to send his volunteers, his paid staff, to go and collect the ballots. To go, what does it take if you know somebody hasn't returned their ballot yet? You knock on the door, you say, hey, Mr. O'Donnell, I noticed you didn't return your ballot yet. Do you need some help filling it out? Or more nefariously, you know who it is that hasn't yet requested a ballot, someone who's not voted maybe in a long, long time. How hard is it to go and request a ballot on their behalf? Now, I'm not saying that that happened, but this is how mail-in balloting schemes always work. And what you always need is the data on who it is that's voting, who has the ballots, who hasn't. Not only did Spitzer Rubenstein get that, he also emailed shortly before the election, Woodall Bogg, the head of the Milwaukee Election Commission, and said, Claire, it's got to be real tough for you to every day run this data. What if I just had access to the city of Milwaukee's database?
Oh, my gosh.
So wait a second. Now, fortunately, I will give Claire Woodall Bogg some credit here. She said, I really don't feel comfortable with that. How about
that's the line.
How about I just give you exclusive access to all of the data you need? It's no trouble. It takes me 5 minutes. Now, wait a second, Marcus. Why does any private group have exclusive access to data that's coming directly from the Milwaukee Election Commission? Right. There's no way I, as a private citizen, would be able to get that. Why was it that CTCL approved groups, the the National Vote at Home Institute, was the only one that was getting this data? The only thing that makes sense, literally the only thing that makes sense, is they were running a ballot harvesting operation. Just in case you're concerned or confused, in Wisconsin, ballot harvesting is not legal. We have tons of laws that say you are the one that turns in your ballot. You don't just give it to a Democratic operative and have them turn it in for you.
We've got multiple illegalities on multiple levels with email evidence, I guess I'm just wondering what the next step should be. Because if this is the amount of evidence that we're garnering, that Eric Cardall is garnering up and putting in these complaints to fight in a litigation battle, if what you're doing is, if you are receiving this information and broadcasting it out from the blowtorch that you have as a radio station there in Wisconsin, is it just the people that need to rise up? Is it the Congress people that need to ask questions? Is it what's going on?
I'll be honest with you. I think our legislature is doing about as good a job as they can. We have a Democrat governor and a Democrat attorney general who, of course, have no interest in this whatsoever. Of course. We have a media in this state that has not reported a single thing on the Milwaukee revelations. Not one. I think I'm the only one. Obviously, other conservative talk show hosts and blogs and whatever else have picked up on this, but no TV, no newspaper coverage, nothing like that. It's almost as though they've decided they're just going to ignore it. Now, with the legislature, there are a number of bills on the table, and one of the bills would ban outright any partnering with any private group for any purpose related to the election. Now, that's a very good bill. There are some other ones that are dealing with other ways in which I believe the election was defrauded. For one thing, we had a whole bunch of people in this state suddenly decide that they were unable to leave their homes, right? Right. It's
indefinitely confined.
Indefinitely confined, right. This was one of the big ones. We went from 70,000 people in Wisconsin being indefinitely confined to 250,000 in less than a year. Now, in indefinite confinement in Wisconsin, you just get ballots automatically sent to you. So there's a huge advantage for people who want to just sort of collect ballots from people who might or might not be actually voting. Now, when you've got all of this, there are other bills dealing with that. So you've got the legislature, and there are other do-nothing legislatures across the country. You know, some Republicans have decided that they just want to move on with all of this. In Wisconsin, we have. And I know you talked to Janelle Branch, and she's been spearheading this. There are a number of other people on the Senate side. Steve Noss, Dewey Strobel they've been real driving forces to getting things changed legislatively. Unfortunately, until you get the Attorney General interested in prosecuting this stuff, and this is where it gets a little nefarious here. You might remember a couple of years ago, George Soros and a whole bunch of liberal groups got involved in district attorney races, and people were wondering, why district attorney races? Well, if nobody is interested in prosecuting any sort of ballot irregularity or vote fraud or any sort of crime, quite frankly, it's real easy to get away with cheating, isn't it? Now, this is where there's another really good bill, by the way, that's on the table. It would allow different jurisdictions to prosecute vote fraud. For example, if, let's say, Waukesha County, which is very conservative, it's right next door to Milwaukee County, which is very Democratic. Let's say I present clear-cut evidence of voter fraud, and I take it to the Milwaukee County District Attorney, who's a partisan Democrat. He's not going to prosecute. This bill would allow Waukesha County to prosecute fraud in Milwaukee County, which I think is a very good bill. So
what you're talking about is bills that are moving forward, and that is incredibly appreciative. But I think we would be remiss, Dan, if we didn't go back and look at all the evidence, all the situations that are nefarious, that are speculative, no more. I mean, we have emails, we have correspondence. Chris Teskey, God-fearing patriot, I would love to have her on, even though she's gone radio silent. And I don't freaking blame her, because look at what they've done around the country with the media doxing. And that was the question I wanted to ask you. What has your experience been like covering this? Have you been experiencing any intimidation?
No, actually, surprisingly, no. I think, hopefully I'm presenting such, I want to say, airtight information. Like what I do, I actually was trained as an attorney. I went to the University of Wisconsin Law School, didn't practice, went right into broadcasting. But I've got that training that allows me to say, look, here's the law. Here are the facts. Here's how the law wasn't followed. I'm not saying anything that can't be backed up by state law. So there aren't any. The worst I got is I testified about this in December. And one of the Democratic members of the state assembly had nothing to say about my testimony except, well, why are we hearing from a radio DJ? To which one of the Republicans said, well, I mean, did you listen to what he said? He was actually the one finding a whole bunch of vote fraud in nursing homes and pointing out the irregularities and illegality. That's another big one in Wisconsin. I am convinced there were massive ballot harvesting operations in particularly inner city nursing homes, group homes, all across the state. I'm willing to wager that this is a big way across the country that the vote fraud apparatus that Democrats very clearly had was operating. They were getting mail-in ballots in the names of people that they knew were never going to vote and just filling them out for them. Yes. I will go to my grave being convinced that's how massive fraud took place in this election.
And I don't remember her name, but there was a woman down in Texas that actually got arrested and charged with the ballot harvesting because Project Veritas outed her. They had cameras on her basically saying, she walked up to people's house and says, here, let me fill you this, let me fill this out for you. Or here's a prize. Or she was selling ballots for $5,000 a ballot.
Yeah. And this is exactly how it works. Now, think about if all of a sudden you've got hundreds of millions of dollars coming in, you've got the people who are in charge of policing this stuff themselves being compromised by all the money that's coming in. You've also got groups that, oh, well, we just want to get out the vote. We're get out the vote groups. We're get out the vote groups. What's so wrong, Dan, about get out the vote? Get out the vote.
I know that.
We need to make sure that the people whose name is on the ballot actually filled out the ballot. And based on I know, shocker, right? Shocker that we would actually want that. That in Wisconsin, at least, and I'll admit I've been focused like a laser beam on my own state, so I haven't really been as in depth on Arizona or Pennsylvania or whatever.
That's why I called you. That's why I called you.
But I mean, like, we have no confidence, and let's not even get started. Like before the election, I almost popped a vein in my neck screaming about this massive ballot harvesting operation. I called it fraud in the park. And the city of Madison had they had people drop off their ballots in every single city park in the city. Now, can you imagine what kind of security was there? It was some dude with a bag full of ballots. That was it. And they had 17,000 votes cast this way, right? This was put forth, this whole thing was done in partnership between the city of Madison and the Joe Biden campaign. Now, you tell me how this is lawful. You tell me they're literally, and Madison votes 90% Democrat. So merely putting this event out, they know that they're going to get a whole bunch of Democrat votes. So they had 17,000 of them. The city clerk in Madison was told by a cease and desist order from the Republican Party of Wisconsin, don't mix the ballots up. Keep these ballots that were collected at what they called it Democracy in the Park. Keep them separate, right? So in case we challenge them, they can be, what does she do? As soon as the event is over, she runs back, mixes them all up. As soon as it happens. Why? Because she knew it was likely not lawful and those ballots were going to be axed. Now, this would be bad enough from a Democrat operative. This is the city clerk of Madison. And this is the point of all my reporting, that the people who were running the elections in Wisconsin were essentially running them in a way that would all but ensure a Joe Biden victory. They knew what they were doing. They're partnering with liberal groups. And they're trying to do everything they can to put their thumb on this guy. They violated state law in keeping the Green Party. And I know in Minnesota, Marcus, you guys had Kanye West on the ballot. We didn't, because Kanye's attorney was essentially locked out of the Wisconsin Election Commission building.
Because Minnesota wasn't the swing state that Wisconsin is.
Exactly. So they actually violated the law to keep the Green Party, which took, coincidentally enough, 20,000 votes away from Hillary Clinton in 2016. They kept him off the ballot. They kept Kanye West off the ballot. Oh, you'll love this story. You'll love this story.
Give it to me, man.
What is 5 o'clock? What is the definition of after 5 o'clock? Is it 5 o'clock and 5 seconds or 5:01?
I mean, I would assume it's 5 o'clock 01, like 1 second after 5 o'clock.
Well, that's where things get crazy. Because Kanye's attorney was locked out of the building, she's frantically trying to get in. At exactly 5 o'clock, she delivered. It's like 5 o'clock and 30 seconds, right? The statute says by 5 o'clock, okay? The common interpretation would be 5 o'clock to 5:01. At 5:01, you're SOL, right? At 5 o'clock and 35 seconds, they say, nope, too late. She's saying, well, wait a second. It's postmarked 5 o'clock. It's literally by 5 o'clock. We hit 5 o'clock. It was not 5:01. The Wisconsin Elections Commission actually violates its own rules and state law in interpreting a way that was not favorable to Kanye West or the Green Party to keep them both off the ballot. So you see, this was in August of 2020. You see, leading up, there are all these steps that are all designed to make it easier for Democrat votes to go to Joe Biden. And who cares? I mean, it should tell you something that the National Vote at Home Institute, these groups, they're not really active in any Republican areas in Wisconsin, just the Democrat areas, just the big Democrat cities.
Me and Eric talked about this. Oh, before I bring that up, I wanted to go back to what was it called in the park? What was it called again?
It's officially called Democracy in the Park, but I call it Fraud in the Park. Which you'll get a kick out of this. The city of Madison city attorney, who's a longtime Dem operative, sent a cease and desist letter to my boss, right? Saying that this is, we object to the characterization of this. You tell Dan O'Donnell to stop. I went back on the next show. It was a Friday they did this. On the Monday, I said, here's a message for the city attorney in Madison. I read him the First Amendment. And I said, look, here's what they tried to do. Any further attempt will be dealt with. Like, we consider this a serious affront to my First Amendment. Never heard another word, of course. This, by the way, in case you're wondering, you have to hit back. You have to hit him back. But I'm sorry, you were saying. No,
I love that story, because that is the action steps that we, the people, need to take. But the fraud in the park, in case you think that that's an isolated incident, look no further than Georgia drop boxes, where the CTCL put over 300 drop boxes all over the state, and they still don't have a chain of custody for over 400,000 ballots. It was only 17 in Wisconsin, 400,000 in one of the most hotly contested, by the way, senatorial races as well in the country.
Yes. Yes. And notice it was the exact same group doing the exact same thing. Yeah. Now, wait a second. Why is it so hard? You've got a month and a half for most of these states to get to the municipal clerk's office, or you can put the ballot in your mailbox and have your mailman take it. Why do we have these random drop boxes just in random places? Like, why is the movement from CTL to get the votes as much away, to get the dropping off of the ballots as much away from a centralized location that could be observed as possible? This was the big objection I had to fraud in the park, was that you have 300 different city parks or whatever ridiculous number it was. Yep. And you've got these people with just Ziploc bags, basically, to collect the ballots in. Who the hell knows who's dropping them off on behalf of who? And I think this was the point.
Yeah. That was exactly the point. And that brings up my conversation with Eric Cardall. And I asked him, I said, why is Wisconsin so under the radar? And he said Wisconsin was, and correct him if he's wrong, or correct me if I'm wrong in this account of what we talked about. But Wisconsin essentially is what he said was the test tube baby for the rest of the country, because it's a hop, skip, and a jump up away from Chicago. Yep. They came up from the inner city, Chicago politics. We all know about it, right? They came up. They wanted Wisconsin to be the test run for the rest of the country. And that's why they came in so early, because you saw in the rest of these states, the CTCL started coming in later September, early October, even into late October, into all these states like Nevada and Arizona and Pennsylvania. I mean, everyone's focus was on Pennsylvania pre-election. You remember this? Because it was the fracking issue. It was the big, it was what what they have 17 electoral college votes, if I'm not mistaken. It was like this big stronghold that Joe Biden wanted to like campaign on his last few weeks. And Trump made like 6 trips there within his last 5 days or something like that. So all the focus was on that. Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, the only thing you heard about for the entire year was basically the Jacob Blake situation. Yeah. And that burned up in a week and then it was gone. And so they were able to fly under the radar. I mean, is Eric wrong in saying that maybe Wisconsin was the hotbed starter for everything that happened around the country?
No. Oh my God, absolutely not. As far back as May, we've got emails setting up Zoom calls between the mayors of Kenosha, Racine, Milwaukee, Madison, and Green Bay to discuss how they're going to apply for these CTCL grants and how they're going to get them. Now, wait a second. Once again, these were the mayors. These weren't the municipal clerks. The municipal clerk decides if we're going to get this grant for the election. So as far back as June, July, I believe early July was when the CTCL grants were finalized, right around the 4th of July, maybe a week later. And by late July, you've got Spitzer Rubenstein already in, already the wheels are in motion by August. So I think Eric is absolutely right that Wisconsin was sort of the test run.
I want to, I guess for lack of a better term with you, speculate. And I don't want to put you in a hot position, but if you can't answer it, dance around the question. Because I think my audience, I want to ask this question because I think they have a right to know. And I want to know. In your opinion, Green Bay Mayor Eric Genrich, Racine Mayor Corey Mason, Claire Vaughn, who got to these people?
What do you mean got to them? Like
how in the world were they all coordinating so early on?
It seemed to have been Corey Mason taking the lead on getting all of the other cities to apply.
Well, then who got to Corey Mason?
I honestly don't know. It seems so weird that all of a sudden this became like priority numero uno for all of these cities, that the mayors had something like 3 or 4 Zoom calls to talk about, like, over the course of the summer, like, how are we going to use these millions of dollars? Like, wait a second, you've been able to run elections just fine for decades and decades and decades without this influx of cash. Why all of a sudden do we need it? So I honestly couldn't even speculate. I think the word went out from CTCL, like, hey, here's how we can, you're all Democrats. Here's how we can get the most out of your Democrat cities, because we really need every vote. So partner with us and we'll make sure, or they didn't even have to say Democrats. It's just known in all of these cities that, especially Milwaukee and Madison, they vote 90% Democrat. So when you say, hey, we'll get the people who don't normally vote to vote, they know that that's going to be a massive windfall of Democrat votes.
I'm going to hit it again. You have Zoom calls, you have emails, you have vote dumps that Trump pointed out just a couple days ago. You've got nursing home situations. You've got fraud in the park. You've got ballot harvesting potentially. You've got emails linking Spitzer Rubenstein with the CTCL and Mark Zuckerberg's funding grants with stipulations attached to them. Where is the accountability? Is somebody going to be held accountable for this? Is somebody going to look back and say there's too much evidence?
Boy, it certainly looks to me like misconduct in public office. If the mayors were literally getting together on secret Zoom calls to usurp the authority of their own city clerks to take over these elections, to do it in a partisan way that they did. In fact, I made the case in a column I have posted on the McIver Institute, which is a conservative think tank here in Wisconsin, McIverInstitute.com. I actually do make the case that it is possible, at least in Genrich's case in Green Bay, that there was in fact misconduct in public office. But in terms of the way, I've been calling for criminal investigations into all of these, appointing a special investigator by the state attorney general. But again, this is where you run into the sort of brick wall.
So I want to stop you right there, because Democratic attorney general is not going to touch this with a 10-foot pole. I don't know Wisconsin constitutional law. I'm not well versed in anything locally Wisconsin. Is there any avenue the people have? Because and this is the reason I bring this up so passionately, is because when the information came out in Green Bay that Spitzer Rubenstein was all of a sudden in there, and all of a sudden we were finding out about operatives with 4 keys to the rooms or 4 to 5 different rooms and sensitive machine information, passwords for the internet. The people of Green Bay showed up and they protested. They took action. Is there any usurpation that the people of Wisconsin can go around the attorney general and say, this is our state, we want a citizen's litigation? I
would demand, I would go to the local district attorney's offices, whether that's in Milwaukee, whether that's in Dane, whether that's in Brown County, where Green Bay is, protest there. Contact the district attorney and say, we demand an investigation. Contact the sheriff's departments in those counties to say, this is criminal activity. This is corruption in public office that we're potentially talking about. You need to investigate it. Like, there are still public corruption units. Contact the FBI, right? I happen to know a lot of the people in charge of the FBI offices in Wisconsin and know them to be people of integrity who were disgusted by what the DC office, the Home Office, was doing to President Trump. Talk to them. These are, this is where you can affect change, by putting the pressure, by at least making your voice heard, right? With an email, with a phone call. Be polite, but be direct and say, look, I want you to take a look at some of the stuff that Dan O'Donnell is bringing to people's attention. I want, you to look at Eric Cardall's research, what Janelle Branchin in the state legislature has found, because these are potentially very, very illegal things that were going on, and they need to be investigated. Well,
and we're going to have Eric Cardall on again on the show. He might be a bi-weekly or monthly contributor, because he had so much, Dan. It was just incredible, the amount of A, wisdom that he had, B, experience he had suing the government, and C, the specific situations like you're talking about in Wisconsin for what's actually happening. I mean, he's on the ground doing the litigation work for these individuals who want to file grievances against what happened to them in their vote.
Yeah, he does fantastic work, and I can't thank him enough for the job he's doing in Wisconsin.
Yeah. So where does this lead for you now? All your research that you've been doing, obviously it's not falling on deaf ears. You've got an audience. You've got a reach. You're not being doxxed yet. Hopefully that doesn't ever happen.
Fingers crossed.
Because God forbid that some dude on the radio who knows what he's talking about, who's investigated all the way back to well before May and well beyond that, has the gall to say the truth on the radio. What are the next steps for you then?
I'm waiting for emails from Madison, Racine, and Kenosha. I am going to continue to push for more legislation to at least go before Governor Evers, a Democrat who's going to veto it. That's inevitable. And then, I mean, unfortunately, this is sort of the paradox here. In order to defeat the fraud, you've got to defeat the fraud at the ballot box. Like, you need to have, here in Wisconsin, we need to defeat Governor Evers. We need to defeat the Attorney General Josh Kaul, both of whom are up for re-election in 2022.
Hold up. This is where people start I'm going to speak for the people. This is where they start to get frustrated, because if they couldn't trust their votes last time, what makes us think they can trust their votes this time? That's
why I call it the paradox. That's unfortunately the reality.
So this is the conundrum.
What I can tell you is I am working and hopefully trying to organize with the Republican Party. I'm trying to get boots on the ground to have the most massive advanced ballot election integrity and election observing force that we can possibly have. That I said I want people to volunteer to literally sit in an empty room watching ballots at 3 o'clock in the morning on a random Tuesday, right? We have a right to do it, right? Why not? Take shifts. You need to have the most advanced observation network you possibly can. Otherwise, the exact same thing is going to happen again.
But
I think at this point, that's all that can really happen.
But you know what they're going to say, Dan?
What's that? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. You know what? Am I on? Yeah. Oh. If you know what they're going to say is they're going to say, well, how do we know that the people now observing, sitting in that room, you just said at 3 o'clock in the morning, observing ballots are bipartisan or impartial? What they do is they create this semantical war to create a narrative that's based on fear, anger, and hatred. And then all of a sudden now the people that want to speak up and want to do the work feel like they don't want to go out and speak up and do the work because of that narrative. And so you've got God-fearing, honest patriots out there in Wisconsin that are like, I want to do what Dan does, or as Dan's telling me to do, it's that gap between what you're saying and the but is that we got to find the courage in there, Dan.
Yeah, I know we do, especially since these are, the places that these are happening are not Republican strongholds. They're all in rough neighborhoods in Democrat-controlled cities. And that's where things get dicey. But I hate to be generic here, as I do unfortunately have to get going. Yeah. But to say that you need to volunteer to observe, you need to get trained as an election observer, get trained as a poll worker, right? Get as many people as you possibly can to volunteer and to force the Republican Party to say, look, I am here. I am going to be an election observer. We need observers every single moment that they have open, they have voting. Every single drop box, you need to have somebody just sitting there watching. They can't kick you out of a drop box. They're sitting on the sidewalk. Literally sit and catalog. Are there people dropping off 200 ballots? If there are, take pictures, get as much information as you can, contact law enforcement, right? These are the things that you can do. But I guess the best advice I can give you is to keep vigilant, join up with your local Republican Party, your local conservative group, and do what you can. It starts now. Voting for 2022 doesn't start for a year and a half. Planning for it starts right now.
Yeah. If there's any congressperson out there in Wisconsin, I appreciate you looking forward and putting forth these integrity bills that are going to give confidence to the people of Wisconsin in the future elections. However, I would strongly encourage everybody listening and you Congress people to really focus on what's happening from the history from the past and all the evidence that this man has been doing and all the evidence that's been going on throughout these last months in Wisconsin. Dan, one quick last thing. How can people get a hold of you? How can people reach you? Like, what do you want to promote here at the end?
Sure. You can find me facebook.com/Dan O'Donnell Show, no apostrophe, DANODONNELLSHOW, at Dan O'Donnell Show on Twitter, at Dan O'Donnell Show on Parler, DOD@iHeartMedia.com with any tips. I read every email and tweet and Facebook message. So by all means, get a hold of me, especially if you're in Wisconsin.
And can people listen to you online as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Dan O'Donnell Show on your iHeartRadio app. Give it a follow, give it a like, give it a whatever subscription.
Whatever the kids are saying these days.
WISN in Milwaukee, WIBA in Madison, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. every weekday morning.
Mr. O'Donnell, that was freaking fire, man. I would love to have you on again with some stuff updating in the future if you're willing to come on.
Absolutely. Anytime. You got my info. Just let me know.
All right. Stick around for 2 seconds. I'm going to end this broadcast for everybody. I want to say goodbye to you off the air. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Go subscribe to my channel. Hit the like button. Share this sucker with anybody you can because it needs to be heard. What he brought was just awesome. Thank you, Dan, once again.
My pleasure.